Hi, everyone. Welcome back to True Crime Echoes. Today's case is one of the most chilling and tragic stories I've ever come across. Not because of a faceless monster hiding in the woods, but because of what happened between three young girls' best friends who let fear and fantasy turn into something terrifyingly real. This is the story of the Slender Man stabbing. A crime that shocked the world, blurred the line between internet myth and reality, and left us questioning how far imagination can go when young minds can't tell the difference. So sit with me as we go back to Waukesha, Wisconsin in 2014 and unravel the story of Morgan, Anissa, and Payton, a story of obsession, betrayal, survival, and the haunting influence of a legend that was never meant to be real. Chapter 1: A Walk Out of the Woods. I want you to picture this: a 12-year-old girl staggering out of the woods, her clothes soaked in blood, every step looking like it might be her last. She's clinging to tree trunks, dragging herself forward desperately, hoping that someone, anyone, will see her before it's too late. That little girl's name was Payton, and the fact that she survived to tell her story is nothing short of a miracle. This is not the kind of nightmare you wake up from. This happened in broad daylight in a quiet suburban town in Wisconsin, the kind of place where parents let their kids play outside without worrying too much. A place that should have been safe. But on that day, May 31st, 2014, safety vanished for Payton in the most unimaginable way. When I first read about this case, I couldn't get that image out of my head, the image of her stumbling through the woods, bleeding out, but refusing to give in. It's the kind of picture that stays with you because it's not fiction. It's not a horror movie. It's real life, and it happened because two of her closest friends lured her into a trap and tried to kill her. What makes this story even more unsettling is why they did it. These weren't hardened criminals. They weren't even teenagers yet. They were just kids 12 years old who believed that the only way to protect themselves and their families from a monster was to murder their friend. And the monster they were so afraid of, he wasn't real. He was a character born on the internet. That's what makes this case different from most true crime stories I've shared. It blurs the line between reality and myth, between friendship and betrayal. And it forces us to ask, how far can the power of belief push someone, especially children, into committing acts we can't begin to comprehend? In this story, we're going to go back to where it all began, to the small town of Waukesha, Wisconsin. We'll talk about how three young girls, Payton, Morgan, and Anissa, built a friendship that would eventually twist into something dark. We'll see how a made-up figure on the internet crept off the screen and into their minds until fantasy and reality were impossible to separate. And we'll walk through the terrifying moment when that fantasy nearly cost Payton her life. But before we dive deeper, I want you to keep that first image with you. Payton, bloodied and broken, yet still finding the strength to crawl out of the woods. Because that's where this true crime story begins, with survival against all odds. Chapter 2: The Beginning of a Friendship, Waukesha, Wisconsin. It's one of those quiet Midwestern towns where people know their neighbors' kids, ride their bikes down tree-lined streets, and families gather for weekend barbecues. It's the kind of place you'd never expect to be the backdrop for a story that would shock the world. And living there was a girl named Payton, though most people called her Bella. She was sweet, gentle, the kind of kid who always tried to see the good in others. Payton wasn't the loudest in the room, but she was loyal, thoughtful, and eager to build strong friendships. In 4th grade, she met a girl named Morgan. Morgan was the opposite in many ways: bubbly, artistic, always cracking jokes, and full of imagination. Where Payton was steady and kind, Morgan was wild and unpredictable, the type of friend who could turn an ordinary afternoon into an adventure. The two balanced each other out perfectly, and before long, they became inseparable. They bonded over things kids their age loved: video games, fantasy stories, science fiction. It was the kind of friendship that felt like it would last forever. You probably remember what that's like when you're a kid and you find that one person you just click with. You start thinking of them less as a friend and more as family. That was Payton and Morgan. But friendships, especially when you're young, can shift in unexpected ways. By the time they reached 6th grade, Morgan introduced a new girl into their circle, Anissa. She lived in the same apartment complex as Morgan, and they rode the same bus to school. Naturally, they grew close, and Morgan wanted her best friend Payton to welcome Anissa too. At first, Payton tried. She wanted to be supportive to keep the friendship intact, but deep down, she never quite connected with Anissa. Something about her just didn't feel right. Still, because Morgan liked her, Payton went along with it. She put up with Anissa even when it meant feeling like she was slowly being pushed to the side. And if you've ever been in a group of 3 friends, you know how tricky that balance can be. Someone always seems left out, whether it's intentional or not. Payton began to notice Morgan and Anissa spending more time together, whispering about things she didn't fully understand, sharing secrets that didn't include her. What once felt like a safe and steady friendship was starting to slip through her fingers. She couldn't have known it then, but this subtle shift, the uneasy triangle between the 3 girls, was the beginning of something much darker. Because while Payton wanted to hold on to friendship, Morgan and Anissa were about to bond over something far more sinister. Something that would change all of their lives forever. Chapter 3. The Legend of Slender Man. It started like so many things do these days on the internet. Morgan and Anissa had stumbled across something that to them felt both terrifying and fascinating. It was a story about a faceless man who lived in the shadows, a creature known as Slender Man. Now, if you're an adult looking at those photos online, it seems obvious they were made up. A tall, faceless figure lurking in the background of grainy black and white pictures. Usually with children nearby, it was creepy. Yes, but it was also clearly a creation of Photoshop. He wasn't real. He was born from a contest on an online forum called Something Awful back in 2009, when a user named Eric Knudsen, under the name Victor Surge, added Slender Man into pictures as a kind of horror art project. But to a child, especially a child with a big imagination, it didn't feel fake. The story spread like wildfire across forums, YouTube videos, fan fiction, even video games. And once you saw his blank white face and impossibly long limbs, it was hard to shake the image from your head. Morgan especially was drawn in. She devoured every story, every picture, every creepy tale about this mysterious figure. Anissa encouraged it too, feeding her stories, sharing videos, whispering late at night about what Slender Man could do. They became obsessed, convincing themselves that this creature was not just real, but powerful, and that he had the ability to control their lives. Payton, on the other hand, wanted nothing to do with it. The whole thing scared her. When she heard Morgan and Anissa talking about Slender Man, she actually went to her mom for reassurance. And like any reasonable parent, her mom told her not to worry, that it was just a scary story from the internet, nothing more. But when Payton brought that back to her friends, asking them to stop, they didn't listen. In fact, Morgan thought it was funny. She doubled down, talking about Slender Man even more. For Morgan and Anissa, it became their shared secret, something they could whisper about and obsess over together. And here's where the danger really begins. They didn't just enjoy the story, they started to believe it. They convinced themselves that Slender Man was real, that he lived in a mansion hidden deep in the woods of Wisconsin, and that he demanded loyalty and sacrifice from those who followed him. For 2 impressionable 12-year-olds, the line between fantasy and reality blurred completely. And Payton, who had once been Morgan's closest friend, was slowly being pushed into the role of an outsider. What none of them could have predicted was how far Morgan and Anissa's belief in this faceless figure would take them, or how it would lead them to make a choice so disturbing it still shocks people to this day. Chapter 4. The Sleepover. By the time May of 2014 rolled around, the 3 girls were in 6th grade. And for Morgan, it was an exciting time. Her 12th birthday was coming up. Like most kids that age, she wanted a simple party with her closest friends, roller skating frozen yogurt, and then a sleepover at her house. On the surface, it looked like the perfect night. Payton, Morgan, and Anissa spent the day laughing, skating, and eating sweet treats. Nothing about it suggested anything sinister, but underneath something darker was already brewing. That night, when they got back to Morgan's house, things felt off. Payton noticed it right away. Usually at sleepovers, kids stay up too late, giggling, watching movies, playing games, daring each other to stay awake until sunrise. But this time, Morgan surprised her. Instead of wanting to stay up, Morgan announced that she wanted to go to bed early. It didn't make sense. Payton couldn't put her finger on it, but it felt strange, like something was happening that she didn't understand. What Payton didn't know was that Morgan and Anissa had already been talking for months about hurting her. They had fantasized about it, even planned to do it that very night while she slept. Morgan's eagerness to go to bed wasn't because she was tired. It was because they were thinking about killing Payton in her sleep. But something stopped them. Maybe fear, maybe hesitation, whatever it was, their plan didn't go through that night. Instead, all three girls fell asleep, and for Payton, it felt like any other slumber party. She had no idea that her two friends were wrestling with a secret so horrifying that it would change her life forever. The next morning, though, that sense of unease returned. When Payton woke up, Morgan and Anissa were already downstairs, sitting silently at the computer. When she asked them what they were doing, they didn't answer. They just kept to themselves, their eyes glued to the screen. It was unsettling. Payton brushed it off, but the tension was there, quiet, heavy, like a storm about to break. And when the girls suggested going to the park later that morning, Payton didn't think twice about it. She thought it was just another part of the birthday celebration. What she didn't realize was that this was all part of the plan, and that morning walk to the park would become the most dangerous moment of her young life. Chapter 5. The Walk to the Park. The morning after Morgan's birthday sleepover started out like any other. The girls had breakfast, played a few games, and then Morgan suggested they go to the park. It sounded innocent enough, just three kids looking for something fun to do on a Saturday morning. Payton didn't hesitate. She trusted her friends. Why wouldn't she? These were the girls she spent nearly every day with, the ones she laughed with, confided in, and shared secrets with. So when Morgan's mom gave them permission to head out on their own, Payton didn't feel any reason to worry. As the three girls walked, the world must have felt so ordinary. The sun was out, they were chatting casually, maybe even laughing. But behind that simple walk was a much darker reality. Morgan and Anissa weren't just going to the park to play. They were leading Payton to a place where they planned to kill her. When they arrived, Anissa suggested a game of hide and seek. Again, it seemed harmless, just kids being kids. Morgan offered to be it, and Payton and Anissa were supposed to hide. That's when Anissa leaned close to Payton and suggested she lie on the ground, cover herself with sticks and leaves. She told her it would be the perfect hiding spot. And Payton agreed. Why wouldn't she? It sounded clever, even fun. So she got down on the ground, started pulling leaves and branches over herself, trying to blend in with the dirt. What she didn't know was that this was the exact moment Morgan and Anissa had been waiting for. They had talked about this, planned and obsessed over it for months. Payton lying defenseless on the ground wasn't just part of a game, it was part of their trap. As Payton lay there, waiting for Morgan to come find them, she had no idea that her best friend was about to walk out of the trees, not with laughter, but with a knife in her hand. Chapter 6. The Attack. What happened next is almost impossible to put into words. One moment Payton was lying on the ground, covered in leaves, thinking she was just playing a game. The next she looked up and saw Morgan standing over her. But this wasn't playful or silly. Morgan was holding a knife she had taken from her kitchen. Payton didn't even have time to process what was happening before Morgan lunged. The blade went down once, then, again and again. It wasn't one or two strikes, it was a frenzy. 19 times. Imagine that. 19 stab wounds to a 12-year-old girl, and each one coming from someone she thought was her closest friend. Anissa was right there, too. Some reports say she held Payton down, others that she stood nearby encouraging Morgan. Either way, she was part of it. Neither of them tried to stop what was happening. They believed they were doing exactly what they needed to do for Slender Man. It's chilling to think about. While Payton's body was breaking under the force of each stab wound, her mind must have been reeling. Betrayal, confusion, terror, all colliding in those horrifying seconds. When it was over, Morgan and Anissa didn't call for help. They didn't comfort their friend. They walked away. They left Payton lying in the woods, bleeding, gasping for air, assuming she would die there. But this is where something remarkable happened. Somehow, against all odds, Payton found the strength to move. Stabbed 19 times, one wound even a millimeter from her heart, she managed to get up. She pressed her hands against the trees, dragging herself forward, stumbling step by step, and eventually she made it out of the woods, out of that nightmare, into a clearing where by pure chance a man on a bicycle saw her. He called 911 and that call saved her life. Chapter 7. Survival and the Investigation. When first responders arrived, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. A 12-year-old girl, pale, barely conscious, with 19 stab wounds scattered across her arms, legs, and torso, yet somehow still alive. Payton was rushed to the hospital, and doctors later admitted they were stunned she had even made it that far. 2 of the wounds had punctured major organs. 1 had damaged her liver and stomach. And one had come so dangerously close to her heart that doctors said if it had been just a hair's width, literally the thickness of a single strand of hair over, she wouldn't have survived. But Payton wasn't done fighting. After emergency surgery, she was stable, though she couldn't speak right away. Investigators brought her a whiteboard and a marker, and when they asked her who had attacked her, she didn't hesitate. She wrote 2 names, Morgan and Anissa, her best friends. What Payton didn't know at that moment was that police had already spotted the girls. Just hours after the stabbing officers found Morgan and Anissa walking near a local furniture store about 5 miles from the park. Their clothes were stained with blood. When the officers questioned them, their story didn't make sense. They said they were on their way to the Nicollet National Forest to meet someone. When pressed further, the truth started to spill out. They admitted they had stabbed Payton, and when police asked why, they gave an answer no one could have prepared for. They said they did it because of Slender Man. To them, this faceless figure from the internet wasn't just a creepy story. He was real. He had power. And they believed that if they didn't kill their friend, Slender Man would come after them and their families. Think about that for a second. 2 12-year-old girls convinced themselves that murdering their best friend was a way to prove loyalty to a fictional monster. And somehow in their minds that made sense. The police had the knife, they had the confession, and they had Payton's testimony. But what they were beginning to realize was that this wasn't just about a crime of violence. It was about the dangerous power of belief, how a story born on the internet could twist reality for 2 children and lead to an almost unthinkable act. Chapter 8. The Legend of Slender Man. When police first heard Morgan and Anissa say the name Slender Man, they must have thought it was nonsense. Just some imaginary boogeyman kids made up. But as they dug deeper, it became clear that to these girls, Slender Man wasn't just a story. He was a living threat. So who or what is Slender Man? Back in 2009, on an internet forum called Something Awful, users were challenged to create creepy photoshopped images of the paranormal. It was supposed to be a fun contest. That's where a man named Eric Knudsen, using the username Victor Surge, introduced Slender Man. In those original black and white photos, you'd see groups of kids, and there, lurking in the background, was this tall, faceless figure. Long, unnaturally thin arms dressed in a black suit watching. To make it scarier, Eric added eerie captions beneath the pictures, little snippets that made it feel like the photos were real evidence. It was all supposed to be entertainment, just fiction. But the internet did what it does best: it spread. Other people started adding their own versions of the story, expanding the myth, drawing fan art, writing new tales. Pretty soon, Slender Man wasn't just 2 creepy photoshopped pictures. He became an urban legend. Kids, and even some adults, believed he was real. They said he lived in the woods, that he could stalk people, drive them insane, or force them to kill for him. Some stories claimed he would kidnap children. Others said he spread a sickness that made people paranoid and violent. And the more people wrote, the more believable it all seemed. By 2012, Slender Man was everywhere. Video games, YouTube series, fan fiction, he'd grown far beyond that original contest. And the thing is, when you're a kid on the internet, it's hard to separate myth from reality, especially when the stories come with photographic proof. That's what happened to Morgan and Anissa. They weren't just reading scary stories. They were feeding each other's fears, spiraling deeper into this belief that Slender Man was real and that he was watching them. To them, he wasn't entertainment. He was a threat. And in their minds, the only way to keep him happy, the only way to protect themselves and their families, was to make a sacrifice. That's where Payton came in. It's chilling, isn't it? Something created for fun on a message board became the inspiration for an attempted murder in real life. Chapter 9: The Aftermath and Arrests. While Payton was fighting for her life in the hospital, Morgan and Anissa were already in custody. Police had spotted them walking along the side of the road about 5 miles from the park where the attack happened. They looked out of place, two young girls, still covered in blood, carrying a kitchen knife. When officers stopped them, the girls calmly explained that they were on their way to find Slender Man. They truly believed they were headed toward his mansion deep in the woods of Wisconsin. At first, investigators thought it was just a bizarre excuse, but the more they listened, the more disturbing it became. Morgan and Anissa weren't panicked. They weren't crying. They were almost matter-of-fact about what they had done. They said they had to kill Payton to prove their loyalty to Slender Man, that if they didn't, he would come for them and their families. It wasn't some spur-of-the-moment decision either. Both girls admitted they had been planning this for months. They had even considered killing Payton while she was asleep during the birthday sleepover the night before. When that didn't happen, they decided to lure her into the woods the next morning. When police searched the girls, they found the bloody knife used in the attack. Anissa was visibly shaken, trembling, almost childlike in her fear. Morgan, on the other hand, was calm. Too calm. At one point, she reportedly told investigators that it was necessary to kill Payton, almost like she was talking about a chore that had to be done. Back at the hospital, Payton managed to tell officers the truth. She wrote the names Anissa and Morgan on a whiteboard to identify her attackers. She survived 19 stab wounds, including one that came within a hair's width of her heart. Doctors said it was a miracle she was alive. The community was stunned. Parents who thought their kids were safe in a quiet Wisconsin suburb were now hearing that two 12-year-old girls had tried to kill their best friend because of something they read on the internet. It didn't feel real. It felt like a nightmare. For Morgan and Anissa, the nightmare was only beginning. Prosecutors had to decide, what do you do with two children who attempted a murder? This brutal. Were they victims of their own imagination, or were they dangerous enough to be treated as adults? That question would hang over the entire case. Chapter 10: Trials, Sentences, and What Remains. When it finally came time for the courts to decide the case of Morgan Geyser and Anissa Weier, became one of the most debated trials in recent memory. These were 12-year-old girls, yet the crime they committed was calculated brutal and nearly fatal. Prosecutors argued that the seriousness of the attack meant they should be tried as adults. It shocked people. How do you reconcile the innocence of childhood with an act so monstrous? During the hearings, more disturbing details surfaced. Investigators revealed just how long the girls had been plotting. They had written about it, whispered about it at school, even brought knives to class. This wasn't a fleeting idea, it was premeditated. Morgan's mental state became a central issue. Doctors diagnosed her with early-onset schizophrenia. At times, she seemed completely detached from reality, even claiming she still spoke with Slender Man. She was eventually deemed competent to stand trial, but it was clear she needed psychiatric care. In 2017, she was sentenced to 40 years in a state mental hospital, the maximum allowed. Anissa's path was different. She didn't do the stabbing, but she helped plan it, encouraged it, and never tried to stop it. Her defense argued that she was impressionable, swept up in Morgan's stronger personality and the shared delusion of Slender Man. In 2017, she was sentenced to 25 years in a mental health facility, though she would eventually petition for early release after serving just over 3 years. And then there was Payton, nicknamed Bella by her friends. She endured multiple surgeries, months of recovery, and years of emotional trauma. She later said the hardest part wasn't the physical scars, but the betrayal. She had loved Morgan like a sister, trusted her completely. To have that trust shattered so violently at 12 years old, it left wounds far deeper than the knife ever did. In interviews years later, Payton came across as remarkably strong. She said she forgave Morgan and Anissa, not because she excused what they did, but because she refused to let their actions define her life. Still, she admitted she would never feel truly safe again. And how could she? Her best friends had tried to kill her in the name of a monster that never even existed. The Slender Man stabbing became a grim warning about the influence of the internet. the fragility of young minds, and the blurry line between fiction and reality. It sparked debates in schools, in courts, and around dinner tables about what kids are exposed to online and how far imagination can go before it turns dangerous. And yet, even after all these years, the haunting part isn't just the story of Slender Man. It's the story of three girls, three children, one who nearly died, two whose lives were destroyed by a fantasy they believed was real. That's the legacy of the Slender Man stabbing. Not a monster lurking in the woods, but the chilling reminder that sometimes the real danger comes from the people we trust the most. And that's the story of the Slender Man stabbing. Three children. One nearly lost her life. Two lost theirs in a different way, swallowed by a fantasy they believed was real. Payton's survival is nothing short of a miracle. But the betrayal she endured reminds us that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't found in the woods or online forums, they're found in the people we trust the most. Stories like this force us to ask hard questions about the internet, about mental health, about how we protect kids from the darker corners of imagination. There are no easy answers, but ignoring it isn't an option either. Thank you for spending this time with me. If you found this case as haunting and thought-provoking as I did, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, be safe out there, make good choices, and I'll see you in the next story.